What if I told you that the worst day of your life could become the moment everything changed forever? The summer sun hung heavy over the forest as Alara made her way between the trees, wicker basket swinging at her hip. Mushrooms. She was supposed to be gathering mushrooms for the evening meal, but her mind wandered to darker thoughts with every step. That morning, the village elders had made their position abundantly clear once again. An omega with hair white as fresh snow and skin pale as moonlight had no place among them. 23 years of those whispers had carved grooves into her heart deeper than any blade could manage. Albinism, they said behind cupped hands, cursed, defective, a stain on their bloodline. Her quiet wolf, dormant in the depths of her consciousness, was just as flawed, too soft, too weak, too useless for survival in the pack. The sound of rushing water grew louder with each step. The river was her favorite place, far enough from the village that she could pretend, just for a while, that she belonged somewhere, that her difference wasn't a curse, but simply who she was. Then she smelled it. Metallic, sharp, the unmistakable scent of life force spilled in violence. Her quiet wolf stirred uneasily in her consciousness, that gentle presence that had always been more whisper than roar, more shadow than substance. The elders claimed her wolf was as defective as her appearance, too soft to be useful, too weak to matter. Alara moved toward the riverbank, her bare feet silent against moss and stone. What she saw there stopped her heart entirely. A massive wolf lay sprawled across the rocks where the current had deposited him like driftwood. His fur, dark as midnight, was matted with alarming amounts of red life force. Battle wounds covered his body, deep gashes that spoke of claws and teeth, of violence so brutal she could barely process it. His breathing came in shallow, rattling gasps that made her chest ache in sympathy. How far had the river carried him? The nearest pack territory was at least 10 miles upstream. He must have been swept away from whatever battle had nearly ended his existence, the current dragging him here to die alone on foreign stones. Alara's hands trembled as she knelt beside the dying animal. Every logical thought screamed at her to run, to fetch the hunters, to do anything except touch this predator who could tear her apart with a single movement, even in his weakened state. Village law was clear. Unknown wolves on their territory were threats. They were to be reported immediately and eliminated. But something deeper pulled at her, something that lived beneath the years of conditioning and fear. That same soft compassion the village called her greatest weakness, the gentleness they claimed would be her downfall, the mercy they said made her unsuitable for survival. She reached out with one pale hand, trembling fingers hovering just above his massive head. "You're safe now," she whispered, though she had absolutely no idea if that was true. "I won't let you die alone." The wolf's golden eyes cracked open, just a sliver, just enough for her to see the intelligence burning in those depths. Not the blank awareness of an ordinary beast, but something far more. Consciousness, understanding. He was looking at her, truly seeing her, and in that moment she knew with absolute certainty that this was no ordinary wolf. This was a shifter. And judging by his size and the power she could sense even in his dying state, he was alpha. His eyes closed again, and she made her decision in that heartbeat. She couldn't carry him. He had to weigh at least 3 times what she did, but she couldn't leave him here either. The afternoon sun would bake him on these rocks, and if he survived that, the night predators would finish what the battle had started. Alara ran. Her white hair streamed behind her like a banner as she raced back toward the village, basket forgotten by the riverside, mushrooms scattered and abandoned. Her chest burned and her legs ached, but she didn't slow until she burst into the village square. "Help!" The word tore from her throat, raw and desperate. "There's a wolf by the river. He's dying. We have to help him." Marcus, the head warrior and the village's strongest alpha, stepped forward from the group of males sharpening weapons. His presence pressed against her senses like a physical weight, making her quiet wolf want to cower and submit. He was the one who had rejected her last spring, calling her softness pathetic, her gentleness a genetic flaw that made her unsuitable as a mate. "A wolf?" His voice carried that edge of contempt she'd learned to recognize. "You want us to save a predator? An unknown wolf on our territory?" "He's hurt," Alara pleaded, hating how small her voice sounded. "He'll die without help." "Good." Marcus's response was immediate and cold as winter ice. One less threat to our borders. Unknown shifters don't wander into our territory by accident, Omega. They come to scout, to steal, to conquer. He didn't wander. The river carried him. He's been in battle. He's barely breathing. All the more reason to finish him before he recovers. Marcus turned to address the gathered crowd. An injured warrior wolf near our borders is exactly the kind of threat we eliminate immediately. Council law is clear on this. But Alara's distress had already drawn more attention. Curious faces appeared in doorways and windows. 3 hunters emerged from the training grounds, weapons still in hand. An elder woman shook her head disapprovingly. Within moments, half the village had gathered to witness the cursed Omega making a fool of herself again. "Show us," one of the hunters said finally. "If he's as close to gone as you claim, we'll confirm it and finish the job properly." It wasn't the help she'd hoped for, but it was something. Alara led them back to the river, her heart pounding with dread. 4 warriors followed, Marcus and 3 others, all carrying blades that gleamed in the fading sunlight. When they reached the riverbank and saw the massive wolf sprawled across the rocks, even the seasoned warriors inhaled sharply. "Moon goddess," one breathed. "Look at the size of him." "Those scars," another murmured. "This one's seen serious combat, multiple battles from the look of it." "Which makes him dangerous." Marcus approached the dying wolf with his blade drawn, his expression carved from stone. "An experienced warrior shifter this close to our territory? We end this threat now before it becomes a problem." "No." Alara threw herself between Marcus and the wolf, her arms spread wide in a pathetically inadequate shield. Her whole body trembled, but she held her ground. "You can't. He's helpless. There's no honor in this. Move aside, Omega." Marcus's command carried the weight of alpha authority, specifically designed to compel submission from lower-ranked wolves. Alara's quiet wolf should have folded immediately, should have forced her body to obey despite her conscious will. That's what alpha commands did. They bypassed choice and demanded submission on an instinctual level that couldn't be resisted. But something in her refused. No. The single word fell into absolute silence. Every person present stared at her with expressions ranging from shock to horror. An Omega defying a direct alpha command was unthinkable. It violated the most fundamental laws of their kind. It suggested either insanity or something far worse. Marcus's face darkened with fury that made her instincts scream in terror. "You dare refuse my command? You choose a dying beast, an enemy, over your own pack?" "I choose mercy over murder," Alara heard herself say, her voice shaking but somehow steady. "I choose compassion over cruelty. When did we become the kind of people who slaughter the helpless? When did honor mean nothing?" "Your white hair has poisoned your mind," an elder spat from the gathering crowd that had followed them. "Your cursed blood makes you defend threats over your own kind." "The law is clear," Marcus said, his voice dropping to something dangerous and cold. "Refusal of a direct alpha command, especially in defense of a territorial threat, carries only one penalty." He sheathed his blade with deliberate slowness. "Elimination of life." Alara's breath stopped in her chest. They couldn't mean... "You've committed treason against your pack," Marcus continued, gesturing for the other warriors to surround her. "And since you love this beast so much, we'll grant you one final mercy. We'll let you watch us finish him before we finish you. Consider it a kindness." 4 warriors moved to form a circle around her. Alara's mind raced frantically, searching for any escape that didn't exist. She had no alpha strength to fight them off. Her quiet wolf provided no dominance, no power, no leverage. She was exactly what they'd always said: weak, soft, cursed, defective. Her hand dropped to touch the dying wolf's massive paw, seeking some small comfort in her final moments. And the world exploded with silver light. Power surged up Alara's arm like liquid moonlight, setting her veins on fire. She gasped as energy she'd never felt before, never even imagined existed, erupted from somewhere deep inside her core. Her hands began to glow with pale luminescence that cast stark shadows across the riverbank. Without conscious thought, without understanding what she was doing or how, she pressed both palms against the wolf's worst wound. The gathered villagers stumbled backward, shielding their eyes from the sudden brilliance. Alara felt the wolf's injuries as if they were her own, felt the torn muscle, the shattered ribs, the dangerous internal damage that should have already ended his life. And she felt her power flowing into him, knitting flesh, mending bone, replacing lost blood with pure life force drawn from where? She didn't know. She only knew it was working. The wolf's golden eyes snapped open, fully aware now, blazing with recognition and something that looked almost like wonder. Know what nobody tells you about discovering your true power? It doesn't feel like triumph at first. It feels like drowning in light you never knew you carried. Marcus and the others had frozen in place, staring at the impossible scene before them. The white-haired Omega they'd dismissed as defective was literally glowing like captured moonlight, her hands pressed against a massive predator wolf, and the creature's wounds were closing, flesh knitting together, red life force stopping its flow, broken bones straightening with audible cracks that made several onlookers flinch. "What is she?" a warrior breathed, his voice strangled with shock. The wolf moved. Not the weak stirring of a dying animal, but the fluid, powerful rise of an apex predator coming into full awareness and strength. He stood on all four legs, and standing, he was absolutely enormous. His shoulder reached Alara's chest even as she knelt. His massive head swung toward the men who had come to end both their lives, and his lips pulled back from fangs as long as her fingers. Then he howled. The sound wasn't anything an ordinary wolf could produce. This was something primal and ancient, something that resonated in the very bones of every shifter present and reached down into their souls to grip their wolves with absolute authority. Royal command crashed through the clearing like a physical force, an alpha dominance so overwhelming that it made Marcus's earlier order seem like a child's whisper by comparison. Every single person except Alara dropped to their knees. Not fell, dropped, their bodies responding to instincts far older than conscious thought. Warriors who had fought in countless battles knelt with their heads bowed low, unable to even raise their eyes to meet that golden gaze. Elders pressed their foreheads to the dirt. Even Marcus, proud alpha warrior, found himself on his knees with his neck bared in a show of submission his conscious mind couldn't prevent. The massive wolf turned his golden gaze to Alara, who remained kneeling upright with her hands still glowing faintly silver against his dark fur. She should have fallen too. Omegas were the most susceptible to alpha commands. Their wolves were hardwired to submit to dominance displays like this. Yet she knelt there with her silver eyes wide with shock, but her spine straight, her head unbowed, her pale hands still resting on his fur as the last traces of her healing light faded. The wolf's eyes widened with unmistakable surprise. Then something else flickered across those intelligent features, recognition perhaps, or wonder at this small white-haired Omega who had saved his life and somehow remained untouched by his royal command. The transformation happened in seconds. Fur rippled and reformed into skin. 4 legs became 2. The massive wolf condensed and reshaped until a man crouched where the beast had been, a man who was clearly alpha royalty from the sheer power radiating from every line of his body, despite the fact he wore nothing but drying red life force and river water. He was tall, powerfully built, with features that were sharp and commanding. Dark hair fell across a strong brow, and those same golden eyes now studied Alara with an intensity that made her breath catch. Scars marked his skin, a warrior's body, a survivor's story written in old wounds and new strength. Those golden eyes never left Alara's face as he rose to his full height, towering over her by nearly a foot. She could feel his wolf's attention focused entirely on her, could sense something profound shifting in the air between them, like the moment before lightning strikes. "You," he said, his voice rough from disuse, but carrying unmistakable authority that made the kneeling villagers flinch. "You're the one who saved me." Alara couldn't find words. Her healing glow had faded, leaving her feeling strangely drained and confused. What had just happened? What was that power? She'd never felt anything like it, never even heard tales of healing that could pull someone back from the edge of gone. The man, the king, she was beginning to realize with growing shock, took a single step toward her. His hand reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted, but she found herself frozen as his fingers brushed her white hair with a gentleness that seemed at odds with his commanding presence. His touch trailed down to her neck where her scent glands marked her as Omega. The moment his fingers made contact with that sensitive skin, his pupils dilated dramatically, his breath caught audibly, his entire body went rigid as if struck by lightning. "Impossible," he whispered, so quietly only she could hear, then louder, with dawning realization that carried a note of awe. You're her. He never finished the sentence. His golden gaze snapped to Marcus, still kneeling in the dirt with his face pale with terror, and the warmth vanished from his expression instantly. You. The single word cracked through the clearing like a whip. You were going to end her life. Explain. Now. Marcus's voice shook when he managed to speak. She defied my command. Alpha law states that refusal of your law means nothing. The king's voice dropped to something cold and deadly that made the air itself feel heavy. She is under my protection now. Anyone who touches her, threatens her, even looks at her wrong, forfeits their existence. Is that crystal clear? Terrified silence answered him. The king turned back to Alara, and his expression softened in a way that seemed almost foreign to his sharp features, like he wasn't quite sure how to arrange his face into gentleness. What's your name? Alara, she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. Alara. He repeated it like he was tasting something sacred, something precious. Then he did something that made every watching villager gasp with pure shock. He took her hand in his palm warm and rough with calluses, hers small and pale and trembling, and he kissed it. Not the casual brush of lips to knuckles that was polite greeting, but a reverent press of his mouth to her pale skin, his eyes closing as if he were savoring something infinitely valuable. Thank you, he said quietly, for her ears alone. For my life. For your mercy when others showed none. For your courage when it would have been safer to walk away. His eyes opened, pinning her with their intensity. I am Karen, Alpha King of the Northern Territories, and I'm taking you home with me. What? No, Alara tried to pull her hand away, but his grip was firm without being painful. I'm not asking your permission. His tone gentled, but the steel underneath remained absolute. These people just tried to eliminate your life for showing compassion. You're not safe here. But I can't just leave. I have nowhere. I don't. Karen's expression shifted to something almost apologetic. I'm sorry. Truly. But we don't have time for a long discussion, and I don't trust these people not to try again the moment I turn my back. He glanced at the kneeling villagers, his lip curling with disgust. They'd call it justice. I call it murder. Before Alara could protest further, he moved with fluid alpha grace. He shifted back into his massive wolf form in a ripple of power that made her gasp, crouched low, and in one smooth motion he scooped her up and settled her across his broad back. Wait! Alara grabbed fistfuls of dark fur, trying desperately to find balance on his shifting shoulders. The wolf, Karen, took off running before she could say another word. The world blurred into green and brown as they raced through the forest at speeds that should have been impossible. Trees whipped past in streaks. The ground vanished beneath his paws. Alara pressed herself flat against his back, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. This was insane. She'd been gathering mushrooms this morning, living her quiet, cursed life, and now she was being carried away by an alpha king she'd just healed with abilities she didn't even know she possessed. Through the rush of wind and the rhythm of his paws against earth, she became aware of something strange. She could feel him. Not just the solid muscle beneath her, not just the heat of his body, but something deeper. His determination, his concern for her safety, his wolf's fierce protectiveness that seemed far too intense for someone he'd just met. What was happening to her? They ran for what felt like hours, though it was probably less than 3. Karen's pace never faltered, his breathing remained steady, his stride eating up miles of forest and field with predatory grace. Finally, the trees thinned and gave way to cleared land, and in the distance, Alara saw something that made her breath stop entirely. A city. No, the capital. White walls soared toward the sky, higher than any building she'd ever imagined. Banners in gold and crimson snapped in the wind. Guard towers bristled with warriors. And at the center, rising above everything else like a crown jewel, stood the palace itself, all white stone and golden spires that caught the afternoon sun and threw it back in blazing glory. This couldn't be real. This couldn't be happening to her. Karen approached the massive gates, and they swung open before he even reached them. Guards dropped to one knee as their king passed, though their eyes widened with shock at the white-haired Omega clinging to his back. Whispers followed them through the streets like ripples in water. "Is that the king? He's been missing for 3 days," we thought. "Who is that with him? Look at her hair. Is she moon-blessed?" Karen ignored all of it, carrying Alara straight through the palace gates and into a courtyard so beautiful it made her eyes sting. Flowering gardens surrounded them on all sides, their perfume almost overwhelming after the simple wildflowers of her forest. Marble fountains splashed water into crystal-clear pools. Servants in fine livery rushed about, their movements efficient and practiced. When Karen finally shifted back to human form in the courtyard center, servants immediately rushed forward with robes. He wrapped one around himself with practiced ease before turning to help Alara down, his hands steady on her waist as she slid from his back on trembling legs. "Welcome to your new home," he said quietly, his golden eyes searching her face. Alara looked around at the marble columns, the flowering gardens, the servants bowing low with expressions ranging from curiosity to shock. "This isn't my home. I don't belong here." "You belong wherever I say you belong." Karen's tone held no arrogance, just simple certainty that somehow made it worse. "And I say you belong at my side." Before she could argue, before she could even process that statement, a woman's sharp voice cut through the courtyard like a blade. "Karen, thank the moon goddess you're alive. When we heard about the ambush at the northern border, when you didn't return, we thought—" The speaker came into view, and Alara felt her stomach drop. The woman was stunning in a way that made Alara acutely aware of her own bare feet, her simple dress stained with dirt and red life force, her white hair tangled from the wild run through the forest. This woman wore a gown of deep emerald silk that probably cost more than Alara's entire village earned in a year. Her honey-colored hair was arranged in elaborate braids. Her amber eyes were lined with cosmetics Alara had only heard about in stories. She moved with the confidence of someone who had never doubted her place in the world, her presence radiating noble breeding and alpha dominance. Those amber eyes landed on Alara, and the woman's expression froze mid-stride. "Who?" Her voice went dangerously soft. "What is that?" "Roxana." Karen's voice held a warning note that made the air between them crackle with tension. "This is Alara. She saved my life." "Saved your—" Roxana's gaze raked over Alara from head to bare feet, taking in the simple dress, the tangled white hair, the pale skin that marked her as different. "You brought a peasant Omega into the palace. As what exactly? A servant? A charity case?" The contempt in her voice made Alara want to sink into the ground. She was acutely aware of how she must look, dirty, disheveled, completely out of place among all this marble and gold and elegance. Her village had always made her feel less than, but at least there she'd understood the rules. Here, she was utterly lost. "Alara is my guest." Karen stepped between them, his body language protective in a way that made Roxana's eyes narrow dangerously. "She will be treated with the utmost respect by everyone in this palace. That includes you." A muscle twitched in Roxana's jaw. "Your guest. I see." Her smile was sharp enough to draw blood. "And how long will this guest be staying exactly?" Karen's expression shifted, something profound moving behind his golden eyes. When he spoke, his voice carried absolute certainty. "Actually, I intend to make her much more than a guest." The courtyard went deathly silent. Even the fountains seemed to stop splashing. Every servant, every guard, every noble within hearing distance froze. "What do you mean?" Roxana's voice had gone dangerously soft. Karen turned to look at Alara, and the raw desire in his eyes made her stomach flip with something she couldn't name. "I've never seen anyone like her. That white hair like captured moonlight, those silver eyes like stars, the pale beauty of her skin that others call cursed, but I call extraordinary." His hand reached out to touch a strand of her hair with reverent gentleness. "She showed me mercy when I was dying, healed me with powers even she doesn't understand. She defied an entire pack to protect me, willing to give her own life for a stranger. He paused, his fingers still tangled in her white hair, his voice dropping to something intimate that somehow carried through the silent courtyard. She's brave, compassionate, powerful in ways that have nothing to do with dominance and everything to do with strength of spirit. I want her as my queen. Alara's mind went completely blank with shock. Queen. He couldn't be serious. They'd known each other for mere hours. She was a cursed Omega from a backwater village who couldn't even read properly. But Roxana's face had gone white, then red with fury that made her alpha presence spike dangerously. You can't. Karen, you can't. Your father, my father is gone. Something flickered across Karen's face, grief, guilt, something painful. Your father made you promise. Roxana's composure shattered completely. Her voice rose to a near shriek that echoed off the marble walls. On his dying bed, you swore to him you would marry me. Your father's last wish, his final command before his life ended, you gave him your sacred word. The courtyard seemed to hold its breath as the full weight of that revelation settled over everyone present. Karen's expression had gone carefully blank, but Alara could see the war raging behind his eyes. I remember what I promised. Then you know you can't break it. Roxana's voice shook with barely controlled emotion, tears now streaming down her perfect face. A deathbed vow to a parent, Karen. It's not just sacred, it's unbreakable. Breaking such an oath would dishonor your father's memory, violate every law of our kind. The moon goddess herself would curse you for such betrayal. This secret is known by only 1% of people. The burden that kings carry isn't just the crown, it's the promises made to dying fathers who will never know if those words were kept. Alara watched understanding and anguish dawn across Karen's face. He'd made a sacred promise to his dying father. No alpha could break such a vow without losing honor, without facing the judgment of their entire society. The weight of a parent's dying wish was absolute in their culture. Karen began, then stopped, his hands clenched into fists at his sides, knuckles going white with the force of his grip. Roxana pressed her advantage, though her voice had softened to something almost gentle now, as if she understood his pain. We were supposed to marry in 3 months. The announcements have been made to every territory. The alliance with my family has been secured, an alliance your father worked years to establish. He spent his final days planning our union, believing you would honor your word to him. She stepped closer, reaching out to touch his arm with familiar ease that made Alara's chest tighten with something she didn't want to name. I know this is difficult. I know you feel gratitude toward her for saving your life. But gratitude isn't love, Karen. It's not enough to break sacred vows over. Karen looked between Roxana and Alara, and the anguish in his expression was painful to witness. Duty versus desire, honor versus heart. The chains of a sacred promise versus what? Hours of acquaintance with a white-haired Omega he found beautiful. Alara felt her heart sink as she watched him struggle. She barely knew this man, but she could already see which choice he would make, which choice he had to make. A vow to a dying father, an alliance already announced, the honor of a king's word, his entire kingdom watching to see if their ruler was a man who kept his promises or broke them when convenient. Against what? A few hours with an Omega he'd just met? Physical attraction? Gratitude for healing? Alara, Karen said quietly, still not meeting her eyes. I need time to think about this, to figure out. He trailed off, jaw clenched with frustration and guilt. Of course you do. Roxana's voice was sugar-sweet now, victory evident in every syllable. She turned to a nearby servant with a gracious smile that didn't reach her eyes. Please show our guest to the South Wing quarters. Make sure she has everything she needs for a comfortable stay. The emphasis on guest and stay made it clear exactly how temporary Roxana expected Alara's presence to be. Your Majesty, a gray-haired man in formal robes approached, bowing low. Forgive the interruption, but the council has been waiting 3 days for your return. They've requested an immediate audience to discuss the border situation. Karen's face showed relief at the excuse to escape this impossible situation. Tell them I'll be there within the hour. He finally looked at Alara, and the conflict in his golden eyes made her chest ache. We'll talk later, I promise. Empty words. They both knew it. As servants led Alara away through marble corridors that seemed designed to make her feel small and out of place, she heard Roxana's voice drift after them, pitched just loud enough to carry. Poor thing. She actually thought, well, better she learns now than later that gratitude isn't the same as genuine affection. Kings marry for alliances, not fairy tales. The servants pretended not to hear. Alara pretended she didn't care. Both pretenses were lies. The quarters they brought her to were beautiful in a way that made her village's entire existence seem like a bad dream. Silk curtains and deep blue framed windows overlooking gardens. A bed so large she could have fit 4 people on it dominated one wall, covered in blankets softer than anything she'd ever touched. A bathing room connected to the side, with a copper tub already being filled by silent servants. "Will there be anything else, miss?" one servant asked, her tone carefully neutral. "No, thank you," Alara managed, her voice small. They left her alone in luxury that felt like a cage. She moved to the window, looking out over gardens she'd never be allowed to truly enjoy, toward a palace she'd never really belong in, thinking about a king who'd promised to make her queen, but couldn't break the promise he'd made to his dying father. What had she expected? She was nobody, a cursed Omega from a village that wanted her eliminated. That she'd healed him was... what? Lucky? A fluke? She didn't even understand how she'd done it. And he was a king with responsibilities, alliances, sacred vows that predated meeting her by years. The logical part of her mind knew Roxana was right. Gratitude wasn't love. A few hours of acquaintance wasn't enough to build a life on. Breaking sacred promises to pursue physical attraction was exactly the kind of selfish impulse that destroyed kingdoms. But the part of her that had felt his wolf's fierce protectiveness, that had experienced his gentleness despite his power, that had watched him defend her against an entire village, that part whispered treacherous questions. What if it wasn't just gratitude? What if that moment when he'd touched her neck and gasped, "Impossible," had meant something more? What if... A sharp knock interrupted her spiraling thoughts. "Miss, Lady Roxana requests your presence in the west drawing room." Alara's stomach dropped. Nothing good could come from that summons. But she was a guest in the palace, and guests obeyed requests from their host's promised queen. She followed the servant through corridors that seemed designed to disorient until they reached a door of carved wood that swung open to reveal an elegant room filled with 24 nobles. All eyes turned to her as she entered, and the weight of their judgment was immediate and crushing. Roxana stood at the center, holding a delicate porcelain tea set that probably cost more than Alara's life was worth. There you are." Roxana's smile was all teeth. "I thought it might be helpful to introduce you to some court customs. After all, if you're going to be staying with us, you should understand how things work here." The nobles whispered behind hands and fans. Alara's white hair suddenly felt like a beacon, her simple dress like rags, her bare feet like a confession of unworthiness. "Let's start with something simple," Roxana continued, her voice carrying that false sweetness that made Alara's skin crawl. "Serving tea using proper court etiquette. Surely even a village Omega can manage that." She gestured to the elaborate tea set laid out on a low table. Porcelain so thin Alara could see light through it. Cups arranged in precise patterns. A teapot with a spout shaped like a swan's neck. Everything beautiful, expensive, and completely unfamiliar. Every eye in the room was on her now, waiting to see the cursed Omega embarrass herself. Alara approached the tea set on trembling legs. Her hands looked wrong against the elegant china, too pale, too rough from village work, too common. She picked up the teapot, acutely aware that she'd never served formal tea in her entire life. Her village drank from wooden cups, not porcelain that cost more than a house. She poured the first cup, trying to remember if she'd ever even seen formal tea service. The liquid sloshed as her hands shook. Tea spilled over the rim onto the pristine white saucer. Whispers erupted around the room like wildfire. "Did you see that? She can't even pour tea properly." The king actually considered her for... Alara's face burned as she continued, each pour worse than the last. By the time she'd served 5 people, she'd spilled on 3 of them, the hot liquid staining expensive fabrics, while their owners pulled back with expressions ranging from disgust to pity. "Enough," Roxana's voice cut through the murmurs with surgical precision. I think we've all seen quite enough. She turned to a gray-haired nobleman sitting ramrod straight in a high-backed chair. Tell me, Lord Aldrich, would you trust this clumsy creature to serve at state dinners, to represent our kingdom to foreign dignitaries? Lord Aldrich shook his head slowly, his expression grave. The king must be under some spell. No rational alpha would consider such an unsuitable match for our throne. Perhaps her albinism has affected more than just her appearance, another noble suggested, not bothering to lower her voice. Cursed bloodlines often manifest defects in multiple ways: physical coordination, mental capacity. It's a mercy, really, someone else chimed in. Better she learn now that she's out of her depth than be publicly humiliated at an actual state function. The laughter was soft but cutting, designed to wound without seeming overtly cruel. Alara stood there with tea-stained hands, surrounded by nobles in their fine silks, and felt every year of being called cursed settle back over her shoulders like a familiar weight. Maybe they were right. Maybe she was exactly what her village had always said: defective, unsuitable, wrong. She fled before the tears could fall, their laughter following her like ghosts through marble hallways back to her gilded cage. That night, Alara lay in the too-soft bed staring at silk canopy above her, replaying every humiliating moment. The spilled tea, the noble's laughter, Roxana's satisfied smile. She didn't belong here. She'd been foolish to let herself hope for even a moment that she could. The next morning brought a sharp knock on her door before dawn had fully broken. "Miss, Lady Roxana requests your presence in the throne room." Round two, apparently. This time, the entire court had gathered. Nobles lined the walls in their finery, whispering behind fans as Alara entered in the same simple dress she'd arrived in. She had nothing else to wear. Roxana stood at the center holding a stack of parchment documents, her smile sharp as broken glass. "Good morning, Alara," her voice carried through the massive room. "I thought for your second introduction to court life, we might test something even more basic than tea service: literacy." Alara's stomach dropped. "These are trade agreements," Roxana continued, holding up the documents. "Simple legal documents that any educated person should be able to read aloud. Surely that's not too difficult." She knew, somehow Roxana knew, that Alara's village had never prioritized education for Omegas, especially not cursed ones. She'd learned to read simple words, enough to get by, but legal documents filled with formal terminology? "Please," Roxana gestured graciously, "read for us." Alara took the parchment with shaking hands. The words swam before her eyes, long, complex terms she'd never encountered. She stumbled through the first paragraph, mispronouncing half the words, her voice getting smaller with each mistake. "Arbitration. No, arbitra. Arbitration," Roxana corrected sweetly. "Continue. The party of the first part, hereby, heretofore, no, hereby agrees to..." Whispers erupted around the throne room like spreading fire. She can barely read. Illiterate peasant, the king was actually considering this creature as queen? Our kingdom would be the laughingstock of every territory. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. The systematic destruction of someone's spirit, one carefully planned humiliation at a time. Alara forced herself through 3 more agonizing paragraphs before Roxana held up a perfectly manicured hand. "That's quite enough. I think we've established that formal education is beyond your experience." Lord Aldrich rose from his seat, his aged face grave with concern. "Your Majesty," he addressed someone behind Alara, and she turned to see Karen standing in the throne room doorway, his expression unreadable. How long had he been there? "With all due respect," Lord Aldrich continued, "this situation has gone far enough. A queen must be educated, refined, capable of representing our kingdom to foreign dignitaries. This girl, while perhaps pleasant enough, lacks even the most basic qualifications." "She's cursed besides," another noble added. "That white hair, that pale skin, it's a sign of defective bloodlines. Our people would never accept such a queen." Karen's jaw clenched, but he said nothing. What could he say? They weren't wrong about her education. She was illiterate by court standards, clumsy with their customs, completely out of her depth. "One more test," Roxana announced, and Alara's heart sank further. After all, we should be thorough. The third test was held in the palace training grounds that afternoon. The entire court assembled again, clearly enjoying the spectacle. In the center of the sandy arena stood an elaborate display of weapons, swords, daggers, staffs, bows. Roxana stood beside them in leather training gear that somehow made her look even more elegant, a sword held with casual expertise in her hand. "Every queen must be able to defend herself and her people," Roxana announced to the gathered nobles. "Physical prowess, warrior spirit, the ability to protect the kingdom in times of crisis." She turned to Alara with that false, sweet smile. "Choose a weapon. Show us you have at least some defensive capability." Alara stared at the weapons, none of which she'd ever touched in her life. Her village had never trained Omegas for combat. Her healing hands had saved Karen's life, but they'd never been taught violence. She picked up a sword because it seemed the most straightforward. It was heavier than she expected, the balance completely wrong in her unpracticed grip. She'd seen warriors train in her village but had never been allowed to participate. "Attack me!" Roxana commanded, raising her own blade with fluid grace that spoke of years of training. "I don't know how." "Then you've already failed, haven't you?" Roxana's voice carried to every corner of the training ground. "A queen who cannot defend herself is no queen at all. She's a liability, a weakness waiting to be exploited by our enemies." The nobles murmured agreement. Several nodded approvingly at Roxana's logic. Alara stood there holding a weapon she didn't know how to use, facing an opponent who had clearly trained her entire life, surrounded by a court that had already decided she was unworthy. "Well," Roxana prompted, "or shall we conclude that you lack even basic warrior instinct, that your so-called healing power is the only thing you have to offer, and healing alone doesn't make a queen?" What happened next changed everything I thought I knew about power and worth. "That's enough," Karen's voice cut through the training ground like a blade. He strode forward, his presence immediately commanding every eye. "This isn't a test. It's a public execution designed to look like evaluation." Roxana's expression flickered with surprise before smoothing back to innocence. "I was merely torturing someone who saved my life because you're threatened by her." Karen's golden eyes blazed with anger Alara hadn't seen before. "Did you think I wouldn't notice? Court etiquette that you know she's never learned. Legal documents in formal language no village Omega would recognize. Combat training she's never received." He turned to address the assembled nobles, his voice carrying the weight of royal authority. "You judge her for lacking skills she was never given the opportunity to develop. You call her cursed for traits she was born with and cannot change. You mock her education while your own territories deny education to Omegas as policy." Lord Aldrich shifted uncomfortably. Several nobles suddenly found the ground fascinating. "She stood between me and elimination when I was dying," Karen continued, his voice dropping to something dangerous. "She healed wounds that should have ended my life. She defied her entire pack, accepting her own death sentence to show mercy to a stranger. That courage, that compassion, that strength of spirit, those are the qualities that make a true queen." He held out his hand to Alara. "Court manners can be taught, reading can be learned, combat skills can be trained, but genuine goodness, the kind that risks everything for a stranger, that cannot be taught. Either you have it or you don't." Alara stared at his outstretched hand, her heart pounding. Part of her wanted to take it, wanted to believe his words, but another part, the part that had been called cursed and defective her entire life, whispered that he was just being kind. That duty would win in the end. "Your Majesty." An elderly woman in scholarly robes approached, her weathered face urgent. "Forgive my interruption, but there's something crucial the court should know about this young woman." Karen's eyes narrowed. "Elder Thea, what is it?" The old scholar's gaze fixed on Alara with something like wonder. "I've been researching since you brought her here. That white hair, the pale skin, the silver eyes, the spontaneous healing ability that awakens in moments of desperate need. I believe she's not cursed at all." The training ground fell completely silent. "She's moon-blessed," Elder Thea announced, her voice carrying across the arena. "Born once in a generation with the mark of the moon goddess herself. The ancient texts describe them, healers whose very presence amplifies the strength of those they choose to protect. The albinism isn't a curse, it's the physical manifestation of divine blessing." Murmurs of shock rippled through the crowd. Several nobles who had been mocking Alara moments ago now looked uncertain. The texts say moon-blessed are chosen by the goddess for a specific purpose, Elder Thea continued. Their power lies dormant until awakened by a soul-deep connection to someone worthy. Someone like, she looked meaningfully at Karen, a true mate. Karen's breath caught audibly. His golden eyes locked on Alara's silver ones with sudden blazing intensity. True mate? Someone in the crowd whispered. The sacred bond the moon goddess creates between two souls meant to be together, Elder Thea explained. I suspect Alara felt it the moment she touched His Majesty, even in his wolf form. That's why her dormant power awakened so dramatically. That's why she was willing to die to protect him. The bond was already forming. That's ridiculous, Roxana cut in, her voice sharp. True mates are children's tales, romantic nonsense. They're documented in every ancient text, Elder Thea countered calmly. And they have one defining characteristic. True mates cannot dominate each other through alpha commands. They complement rather than control. Understanding dawned across Karen's face. When I gave my royal command at the river, everyone else fell to their knees, but she remained standing. Because true mates are equals, Elder Thea confirmed. The bond protects them from each other's dominance. It's one of the ways the goddess ensures the pairing is genuine, based on choice, not compulsion. The training ground erupted in whispers. True mates were the stuff of legend, of old stories told around fires. Most wolves never found theirs, settling for compatible partners instead. But a true mate bond blessed by the goddess herself? That changed everything. No. Roxana's voice cut through the chaos, sharp and desperate. No, this doesn't change anything. Karen, you gave your father a sacred deathbed vow. True mate or not, you cannot break that promise without dishonoring his memory. And just like that, the euphoria in the air collapsed back into harsh reality. Karen's expression shifted from wonder to anguish in the space of a heartbeat. His hand, still outstretched toward Alara, slowly lowered. She's right. I made a promise to my dying father. Breaking such a vow would curse not just me, but my entire bloodline. Elder Thea opened her mouth to speak, but Karen shook his head. The moon goddess may have chosen Alara as my true mate, but my father, on his deathbed, chose Roxana as my queen. Both are sacred, both are binding, and He looked between the two women, his golden eyes filled with a pain that made Alara's chest ache. I don't know which duty weighs heavier. He turned and walked away, his shoulders rigid with tension, leaving Alara standing in the center of the training ground, holding a sword she didn't know how to use, while the entire court whispered about true mates and broken promises and impossible choices. Roxana's triumphant smile was cold as winter. Moon blessed or not, she said quietly, just loud enough for Alara to hear. Sacred vows still bind him to me. Being his true mate means nothing if duty chooses otherwise. And in that moment, Alara realized something that made her blood run cold. She could be everything the moon goddess intended her to be, blessed, powerful, his perfect match, and still lose him to a promise made before they'd ever met. 3 days passed in that gilded cage. 3 days of avoiding the court, of eating meals alone in her quarters, of staring out windows at gardens she wasn't truly welcome to walk in. Servants brought food and fresh clothes, simple dresses in pale colors that somehow made her white hair look less stark, but they spoke only when necessary, their eyes carefully neutral. Karen didn't come to see her. Not once. On the 4th morning, Elder Thea appeared at her door unannounced, her weathered face kind but determined. Get up, child. If you're going to hide in here feeling sorry for yourself, you might as well make productive use of the time. Alara blinked at the old scholar's bluntness. I'm not. You are, and I don't blame you. But wallowing won't change your situation. Thea moved to the window, gesturing at the eastern gardens below. There's a training courtyard beyond those hedges. Private. No one uses it except occasionally the king when he wants to practice alone. I've arranged for you to have access. Training for what? You saw me with that sword. I'm useless. You're untrained. There's a difference. Thea's sharp eyes pinned her. Your healing power is extraordinary, but it's raw, untamed. What you did at the river was instinct, but instinct alone won't be enough if you ever face a true crisis. Something in the old woman's tone made Alara pause. What kind of crisis? Thea's expression darkened. There are rumors from the northern border, increased enemy movement, dark magic being gathered. If war comes to this kingdom, the king will ride to meet it. And if you truly are his moon-blessed mate, your power could mean the difference between victory and catastrophe. But he's going to marry Roxana, Alara said quietly. The sacred vow to his father is binding, yes, but true mate bonds don't simply disappear because they're inconvenient. Thea moved closer, her voice dropping. The connection between you exists whether he accepts it or not, and if war comes, that connection could save not just his life, but this entire kingdom. She pulled a small leather-bound book from her robes. These are my notes on moon-blessed abilities documented throughout history. Study them, practice, learn what you're capable of before circumstances force your hand. This changed everything I thought I knew about waiting for someone else to decide my worth. Over the next week, Alara threw herself into training with a desperation that surprised her. Every morning before dawn, she slipped into the private courtyard Elder Thea had promised. The old scholar came for the first few days, teaching her meditation techniques to access her dormant power without the catalyst of life-threatening crisis. Your healing responds to desperate need, Thea explained as Alara sat cross-legged on the grass, trying to find that silver light inside herself. But true mastery means controlling it through will, not emotion. Feel for it, that wellspring of moon-blessed energy that awakened at the river. It took 3 days before Alara managed to summon even a flicker of silver light in her palm without someone dying nearby. When she finally did, tears of frustration and relief streamed down her face. Good, Thea said simply. Now do it again, and again, until it's as natural as breathing. By the second week, Alara could maintain the healing light for several minutes at a time. She practiced on small things, willing flowers in the garden, healing cuts on servants who grew less wary of her as word spread of the moon blessed in their midst. One morning, she arrived at the training courtyard to find Karen already there. He stood in the center bare-chested, running through combat forms with a practice sword. Sweat gleamed on his skin as muscles moved with predatory grace. He froze when he saw her, golden eyes widening. They stared at each other across the courtyard. 2 weeks since he'd carried her here on his back. 2 weeks since he'd declared his intention to make her queen. 2 weeks of silence while he wrestled with impossible choices. I didn't know you used this courtyard, Alara said finally, her voice small. I didn't know you'd started training. His gaze took in her simple training clothes, the silver light still glowing faintly in her palms from her morning practice. Elder Thea told me you've been working with your abilities, that you're making remarkable progress. I'm trying. Alara let the light fade, suddenly self-conscious. She said if war comes, this power might be useful. Something flickered across Karen's face, pride, perhaps, or pain. War's coming. The Northern Scouts confirmed it yesterday. A massive force gathering beyond our borders. We have maybe 2 weeks before they march. 2 weeks, 14 days. And you'll lead the army to meet them, Alara said. It wasn't a question. It's my duty. Karen set down his practice sword, moving closer. But there's something you should know. The enemy has dark mages, powerful ones. They drain the life force from our warriors, making them weak and sluggish. It's how they've managed to threaten our borders despite our superior numbers. Alara's mind raced. But if I could counter that drain, if my healing could restore what they take, that's what Elder Thea believes. Karen was close now, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his skin, could smell his scent, pine and smoke and something uniquely him. But the texts say moon-blessed power works strongest through the true mate bond. The closer the connection, the more powerful the effect. His golden eyes met hers, and the intensity there made her breath catch. Which means I need to ask you something, and I need you to understand I'm not asking because of duty or strategy or kingdom. I'm asking because even knowing I can't give you what you deserve, I need to know, Your Majesty! A guard burst into the courtyard, breathing hard. Urgent news from the northern border. Karen's expression shifted instantly to battle readiness. Report. The enemy force is moving ahead of schedule. They'll reach our outer territories in 5 days, not 14. And there's more. The guard hesitated, his face pale. They're not just marching. They're burning everything in their path. Villages, farmland, everything. Thousands of refugees are fleeing south toward the capital. 5 days. Not 2 weeks. 5 days. Karen's jaw clenched. "Gather the council. We mobilize within the hour." He turned back to Alara, and the conflict in his eyes was painful to witness. "I don't have time. I don't have the luxury of sorting through my feelings and promises and impossible choices. But Alara, I need you to understand." "Go," she said quietly. "Your kingdom needs you. We can talk about this later." "If there is a later," her mind whispered treacherously. He looked like he wanted to argue, to say something that would fix this impossible situation. Instead, he reached out and cupped her face with one calloused hand, his thumb brushing across her cheek with devastating gentleness. "I'm sorry," he whispered, "for all of it." Then he was gone, striding from the courtyard with the guard, his shoulders already carrying the weight of command and impossible decisions. Alara stood alone in the training courtyard, her hand pressed to her cheek where his touch still burned, and felt something inside her crystallize into certainty. She couldn't control his choices, couldn't force him to break sacred vows or ignore duty, but she could control her own power, her own decisions, her own worth. If war was coming in 5 days, she had 5 days to become strong enough to help. Whether he chose her or Roxana, whether he accepted the mate bond or honored his father's dying wish, none of that changed the fact that she could save lives with her healing. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. She summoned the silver light to her palms and got back to work. The next 3 days passed in a blur of training that left her exhausted and trembling, but infinitely stronger. Elder Thea pushed her mercilessly, teaching her to extend her healing beyond touch, to sense injuries from a distance, to draw on the ambient life force around her rather than depleting her own reserves. "Moon Blessed can channel the goddess's own power," Thea explained as Alara practiced healing wounds on volunteer soldiers. "But you have to open yourself to it. Let it flow through you rather than from you." By the 3rd day, Alara could heal multiple injuries simultaneously, her silver light spreading like aurora across the training grounds to touch 6 warriors at once. The soldiers who had mocked her weeks ago now looked at her with something approaching awe. On the 4th day, chaos erupted in the palace. Alara was in the courtyard when she heard the shouting, desperate, terrified voices echoing through the halls. She ran toward the sound and nearly collided with a servant. "The king!" the woman gasped. "He went to scout the enemy position. They ambushed his party. He's injured. They're bringing him back." Alara's heart stopped. The mate bond she'd been trying to ignore suddenly roared to life in her chest, screaming that something was terribly wrong. She could feel his pain like knives in her own body, could sense his life force flickering like a candle in high wind. She ran. The throne room had been converted to a makeshift medical station. Karen lay on a table in the center, his skin gray with blood loss, his breathing shallow and labored. Dark magic clung to his wounds like poison, preventing them from closing naturally. 4 healers worked frantically around him, their hands glowing with conventional healing light that seemed to slide off the dark corruption without effect. "It's not working," one healer cried. "The dark magic is too strong. It's blocking everything we try." Roxana stood at the head of the table, her perfect face twisted with genuine fear. "Do something. He's dying." My hands trembled as I witnessed what happens when you wait too long to accept what the goddess offers, when duty and fear delay destiny until crisis forces your hand. Alara pushed through the crowd of nobles and healers, not bothering to ask permission. She placed both hands on Karen's chest and felt the dark magic instantly. Cold, corrupting, designed specifically to drain and kill. But she was moon-blessed, and this darkness had no power over the goddess's own light. Silver radiance exploded from her palms, so bright several people cried out and shielded their eyes. Alara poured everything she had into him, not just healing energy, but life force, strength, will. She felt the dark magic fighting her, trying to corrupt her light, but her power simply dissolved it, like dawn burning away night. The mate bond between them flared to life with intensity that made them both gasp. Through it, she could feel everything, his pain, his fear, his desperate guilt over the promises binding him to Roxana, while his soul screamed for Alara. And she felt something else. A well of power that wasn't hers alone but theirs together, the true mate bond amplifying her moon-blessed abilities into something neither of them could achieve separately. His wounds began closing. Color returned to his face, His breathing deepened and steadied. When she finally pulled back, exhausted but triumphant, Karen's golden eyes locked onto hers with an intensity that made the entire throne room disappear. "You saved me," he whispered. "Again." "That's what mates do," Alara said quietly. The throne room fell completely silent as the weight of that statement settled over everyone present. Roxana's face had gone white as fresh snow. No, this doesn't change. Everything has changed." Elder Thea's voice cut through the tension like a blade. She stepped forward, holding an ancient tome that looked like it might crumble to dust at any moment. "I've been researching Your Majesty's father's final wishes, and I found something crucial in the historical records." She opened the book with trembling hands. King Roland made his son promise to marry Roxana on his deathbed, but according to the official recorded transcripts, his exact words were, "Promise me you will marry Roxana unless the moon goddess herself declares otherwise." The throne room erupted in whispers. "Unless the goddess declares otherwise," Thea repeated firmly. "A true mate bond is the only way the moon goddess declares her will regarding marriage pairings. Your father built in an exception specifically for this possibility." Karen sat up slowly, his hand finding Alara's and gripping tight. He knew. He knew I might find my true mate and didn't want the vow to bind me if the goddess herself had other plans. "This is absurd," Roxana's voice rose to a near shriek. "You're twisting his words." "I'm reading them exactly as recorded," Thea said calmly. "Witnessed by 3 council members, all of whom confirmed this was your father's precise phrasing. He added that clause specifically, Your Majesty. He loved you enough to leave you an honorable way out if fate demanded it." Karen looked at Alara, really looked at her, and she saw the moment his final hesitation crumbled. "The goddess chose you. My father gave me permission to honor that choice. And his voice broke slightly, I choose you too. Not just because of divine will or my father's exception, but because you are brave and compassionate and strong in ways that have nothing to do with dominance. Because you healed my wounds, but also showed me what true strength looks like." He stood, pulling her up with him, and addressed the assembled court with absolute authority. "I am breaking my engagement to Roxana, not out of dishonor, but in fulfillment of my father's true wish, that I follow the moon goddess's will above all else. Alara is my true mate, declared by divine bond and proven through action, and she will be my queen." The throne room erupted in chaos, some cheering, some protesting, but Karen ignored all of it. He pulled Alara close and kissed her with a desperate intensity that made her forget everything except the feeling of his mouth on hers and the mate bond singing between them. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. "But there's no time to celebrate. The enemy force reaches our borders tomorrow at dawn. I have to lead the army out within the hour." "Then I'm coming with you," Alara said firmly. "Absolutely not. My power can counter their dark mages. You know it can. You felt what we're capable of together through the bond." She gripped his hands tightly. "Your army needs us both, Karen. Not separately, but together. That's what true mates are for." He looked like he wanted to argue, wanted to protect her by keeping her safe in the palace, but duty won over personal preference. "Then we fight together," he said finally. "But Alara, if anything happens—" "Nothing will happen." She summoned silver light to her palms, letting it dance across their joined hands. "We're moon-blessed and Alpha King, and we're going to show them exactly why you don't threaten our kingdom." They rode out at dawn, with 200 warriors behind them. Alara sat astride a white mare beside Karen's massive black stallion, both of them dressed in leather armor that bore the royal crest. She could feel the eyes of every soldier on her, some curious, some skeptical, but all aware that their king rode into battle with his moon-blessed mate at his side. The ride north took 3 hours at hard pace. With every mile, Alara could feel the mate bond growing stronger, as if proximity to danger heightened their connection. She could sense Karen's determination, his battle focus, and underneath it all, his fierce protectiveness toward her that he was forcing himself to suppress. "I can feel you worrying," she said quietly as they crested a hill overlooking the northern plains. "I can't help it." His golden eyes met hers. "True mate or not, this is your first battle, and the enemy has dark magic specifically designed to to drain life force, which is exactly what I can restore. She reached across the space between their horses to touch his hand. Trust the goddess's choice, Karen. She didn't make us mates just for us to hide from danger. Below them, the battlefield came into view. The enemy force was massive, easily 400 warriors spread across the plains, with 3 robed figures at their center, radiating pulsing waves of dark purple energy. Even from this distance, Alara could feel their magic like oil on her skin, wrong and corrupting. Karen's expression hardened into battle readiness. Remember the plan. You stay close to me. I'll handle the physical combat. You counter their dark magic and keep our warriors strong. Together, Alara agreed. He turned to address his army, his voice carrying with alpha authority. Warriors of the North, today we face an enemy who thinks dark magic makes them invincible. They're wrong. We have something they can never match, the moon goddess herself, fighting on our side. He gestured to Alara. Your queen will protect you from their corruption. Trust in her blessing, fight with honor, and show them why our kingdom has never fallen. The warriors roared approval, weapons raised high. Then they charged. The armies collided with the sound of thunder. Steel clashed against steel. War cries echoed across the plains. And immediately, Alara felt the dark mage's power spreading like poison through the battlefield, invisible tendrils seeking to drain the life force from every northern warrior they touched. She didn't hesitate. Silver light exploded from her in a wave that washed over every warrior wearing northern colors. Where the dark magic tried to drain, her moon-blessed power restored. Where the enemy's corruption sought to weaken, her healing strengthened. Karen shifted into his massive wolf form mid-charge, and through their mate bond, Alara felt the transformation like it was happening to her own body. She reached out instinctively, pouring silver energy into him, and watched as his already impressive size seemed to grow even larger, his golden eyes blazing with combined power. They fought as one entity with 2 forms. Karen tore through enemy lines with supernatural speed and strength, each movement precise and devastating. But whenever a blade found its mark, whenever claws raked across his hide, Alara was there through the bond. Her silver light closed wounds almost as fast as they opened, her power flowing into him in an endless stream that made him seem unkillable. I cried from joy for hours when I realized what happens when 2 souls meant to be together finally stop fighting destiny and embrace it completely. The dark mages noticed quickly. One of them, the most powerful, judging by the intensity of his purple aura, focused entirely on Alara, sending a concentrated blast of corrupting magic straight at her heart. The bond saved her. Karen felt her danger through their connection before she consciously registered the attack. His wolf form spun mid-combat, leaping between Alara and the dark magic. The blast hit him instead, and for a terrible moment, purple corruption spread across his fur like rot. But Alara's silver light met the darkness instantly, dissolving it before it could take hold. Through the bond, she didn't just heal the damage, she used their connection to trace the dark magic back to its source and shatter it at the root. The dark mage screamed as his own corrupting power backlashed into him, his spell unraveling with catastrophic force. "They're connected," another mage shouted. "The king and the white-haired witch, they're feeding power to each other. We have to separate them." But they couldn't. That was the entire point of true mates. They were strongest together, and no external force could sever what the moon goddess herself had joined. The battle raged for what felt like hours, but was probably less than one. Alara lost track of how many warriors she healed, how many times she poured life force into Karen through their bond, how many dark magic attacks she dissolved with her moon-blessed light. She was operating on pure instinct now, the power flowing through her as naturally as breathing. Around them, the northern warriors fought with supernatural endurance. Where they should have been weakening from exhaustion and dark magic drain, they remained strong. Where the enemy expected their life force to fail, it held steady. Because Alara held them steady. The turning point came when the lead dark mage, desperate and furious, gathered every scrap of his remaining power for one massive attack. Purple energy coalesced into a spear of pure corruption aimed directly at Karen's heart, too fast to dodge, too powerful for his natural defenses to withstand. Alara didn't think. She simply acted. She threw herself between Karen and the attack, silver light blazing from her like a star-going supernova. The dark magic spear hit her moon-blessed shield and didn't just stop. It shattered, fragments of purple corruption dissolving into nothing against the pure white radiance of divine protection. The mate bond between them flared so bright it was visible to every person on the battlefield, a golden-silver rope of pure energy connecting king and queen, alpha and omega, warrior and healer. "Impossible!" the dark mage shrieked. "No power should be able to counter—" He never finished the sentence. Karen's massive wolf form lunged faster than the eye could follow, and the mage's life ended in a flash of claws and fangs. With their leader gone, the remaining enemy forces broke. Faced with warriors who wouldn't stay down, whose wounds closed almost as fast as they were made, whose strength never seemed to fade, their courage failed completely. They fled, abandoning weapons and pride in their desperation to escape. As the last enemy disappeared over the ridge, Karen shifted back to human form. He was covered in blood and dirt, exhausted and trembling, but he was grinning. He caught Alara as her legs finally gave out, both of them sinking to the ground in a tangle of limbs and laughter and sheer relief. "You were magnificent," he said, pulling her close. "They never stood a chance, not against us together." Alara looked around at the battlefield, at warriors standing because of her power, at the kingdom they'd saved together, at the mate who looked at her like she'd hung the moon and stars themselves. She thought about the cursed Omega who had stumbled upon a dying wolf by a river just weeks ago. Thought about the girl who had been told her entire life that she was defective, wrong, unsuitable. And she realized something profound. Her village had been wrong. Roxana had been wrong. Everyone who had ever called her cursed or weak or unworthy had been wrong. She wasn't defective. She was exactly what the moon goddess intended her to be. Karen stood, pulling her up with him, and addressed the assembled warriors with absolute authority. "Your queen proved herself today. She protected every one of you, countered magic that should have been unbeatable, and saved not just my life, but this entire kingdom." The warriors roared approval, weapons raised high in salute to the white-haired Omega, who had become their queen through courage and divine blessing. Karen turned back to Alara, his voice, dropping to something intimate meant only for her. "Your reign didn't begin in a throne room with ceremonies and crowns. It began here, on a battlefield, proving your worth through action." He pulled her close, his forehead resting against hers. "Are you ready for everything that comes next? Being queen, helping me rule, facing whatever challenges the future brings?" She looked at their joined hands, his tanned and scarred from years of combat, hers pale as moonlight but no longer trembling with uncertainty. She felt the mate bond humming between them, felt his heartbeat as if it were her own, felt the rightness of standing beside him, not behind him. "I'm ready," she said with absolute certainty. He kissed her then, deep and claiming and full of promise, while their army cheered and the setting sun painted everything gold. They rode back to the capital as king and queen, alpha and omega, true mates blessed by the moon goddess herself. And when they reached the palace gates, the entire city had turned out to welcome them home, not just welcoming their victorious king, but celebrating the moon-blessed queen who had saved them all. Roxana was nowhere to be seen. The nobles who had mocked Alara's lack of education now bowed low as she passed. The servants who had once looked at her with pity now showed respect. But none of that mattered as much as the feeling of Karen's hand in hers and the absolute certainty that she was finally, truly home. If this story found resonance in your heart, share in the comments which moment touched you the most. Thank you for your time.